You stole it. I know you did. You stole $4,500 right out of the register, and you are not leaving this yard until the police get here." The scream tore through the heavy, humid air of a Westchester July. Chloe stood over me, her chest heaving, a perfectly manicured finger trembling just 3 inches from my nose. The acrylic tip was painted a pale, tasteful pink, contrasting sharply with the purple flush of absolute rage creeping up her neck. I didn't blink. I didn't lean back. I just watched her. There are moments in life when time ceases to flow in seconds and instead begins to measure itself in heartbeats. My resting heart rate was 52 beats per minute. I knew this because, as an officer in the United States Army, regulating my physiology was the first lesson I learned before they ever taught me how to fire a weapon. Stillness first, awareness second, movement last. Around us, the 4th of July family barbecue had frozen into a bizarre, terrifying tableau. My brother Mark stood immobilized by the stainless steel Weber grill, a pair of silver tongs suspended in mid-air over burning charcoal. The faint, sweet smell of hickory smoke drifted over the patio, mixing strangely with the sharp, synthetic scent of Chloe's expensive floral perfume. To my right, a plastic cup of lemonade had been knocked over in Chloe's initial tirade. The pale yellow liquid was actively pooling across the expensive slate tiles, creeping slowly toward the leg of my chair. I watched a single ice cube slide over the edge of the stone and land silently in the manicured grass. "Did you hear me, Sarah?" Chloe shrieked, her voice cracking as it reached a register only dogs and panicked civilians operate in. "I called 911. They're coming for you," I heard her. I heard the tremor of adrenaline in her voice. I saw the dilated pupils of someone who had lost complete control of their emotional baseline. Anger is loud. Power is quiet. I remained seated in my cheap white plastic lawn chair, the kind you buy in stacks of 10 at a hardware store. It dug slightly into the back of my thighs, but I didn't adjust my weight. Shifting would signal discomfort. Discomfort would signal guilt. In the world I operated in, nonverbal communication was often the difference between a successful extraction and a catastrophic failure. Here, in the wealthy suburbs of New York, it was simply the difference between giving my sister-in-law the reaction she craved and denying her the oxygen she needed to keep the fire burning. "Say something," she demanded, slamming her palm down on the glass patio table. The structure rattled, sending a platter of deviled eggs vibrating toward the edge. My mother, standing near the sliding glass doors of the 6-bedroom colonial, finally found her voice. "Sarah, please," she whispered, her hands clasped together in a tight, anxious knot. "Just tell her you didn't do it. Just clear this up." I looked at my mother. I saw the fear of public embarrassment in her eyes. In my family, appearances were the currency of choice. And right now, the underachieving daughter was bankrupting them in front of the neighbors. I didn't argue. I didn't ask questions. There are moments when your training takes over before your emotions can catch up. Years of service had rewired something fundamental in me. Even in unfamiliar places, even in the backyard of the house I grew up in, my body still defaulted to readiness. I was scanning the perimeter. I was noting the exit routes. I was cataloging the exact distance between the patio and the heavy wooden fence that separated my brother's property from the street. And I was listening. Beyond the frantic chirping of the cicadas in the oak trees, beyond the rhythmic popping of the charcoal on the grill, I heard it, a distant wail, the sharp rising and falling pitch of a siren cutting through the thick summer heat. Chloe heard it too. A triumphant, vicious smile broke through her rage. She crossed her arms, adjusting the silk sleeves of a blouse that cost more than my first car. She looked down at me, her eyes practically gleaming with the anticipation of my ruin. "You're done, Sarah," she spat, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper for only me to hear. "I'm going to watch them put you in handcuffs for taking from my boutique Lumiere. My money." The wail of the sirens grew deafening, bouncing off the manicured brick facades of the neighborhood. The deep rumble of the police cruiser's engines vibrated through the soles of my boots. I could hear the crunch of heavy tires turning sharply onto the gravel driveway at the front of the house. Panic began to ripple through the rest of the backyard. My aunt nervously packed away a Tupperware container. My brother finally dropped the silver tongs. They clattered loudly against the concrete. They were civilians reacting to the sudden, violent intrusion of authority into their carefully curated world. For me, it was simply Tuesday. Every instinct they possessed was screaming at them to panic, to explain, to deflect. But panic is a useless frequency. I had spent the last decade operating in environments where a single panic breath could get an entire team killed. I had sat across from men who would cut my throat if I blinked too slowly. A screaming woman in a designer blouse at a suburban barbecue did not meet my threshold for distress. I let the silence stretch. I let the blue and red lights begin to reflect off the siding of the house. I let Chloe believe for just a few more seconds that she was the architect of my destruction. When someone is digging a grave, a professional never interrupts them to ask if they need a bigger shovel. She told them she had caught a thief, but she didn't realize she had just summoned the local police to an active federal operation, and I was the one running it. The red and blue lights strobed against the white vinyl siding of my brother's house, casting long, fractured shadows across the meticulously manicured lawn. To understand how I ended up in a plastic chair, calmly waiting to be arrested by the local police, you first have to understand the architecture of a lie. Not my lie, theirs. My name is Captain Sarah Jenkins. I am 10 years active duty, United States Army Counterintelligence. For the past 24 months, I have been cross-detailed as a Supervisory Special Agent, or SSA, attached to the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force, the JTTF, operating out of the New York field office in Lower Manhattan. I do not wear a uniform to family barbecues. I do not carry my credentials on a lanyard around my neck. I do not discuss my day. In my line of work, anonymity is the heaviest armor you can wear. To my parents, my brother Mark, and especially to my sister-in-law Chloe, I was simply an underachieving government worker. In their minds, I was a mid-level bureaucrat shuffling paperwork in a drab cubicle, existing on a modest GS-scale salary, and continually failing to meet the traditional milestones of suburban success. They saw my plain dark denim and standard-issue gray polos as a lack of fashion sense, rather than the required civilian attire for an agent who needs to blend into the concrete background of the city. They saw my 6-year-old, unmarked Ford Taurus sedan as a sign of financial struggle, rather than a motor pool vehicle equipped with a level IV armored engine block and encrypted VHF radios. People only see the reality they are equipped to comprehend. When you spend your 20s missing family Thanksgivings, the absence leaves a void that people are eager to fill with their own narratives. They didn't know that Thanksgiving 2018 was spent inside a windowless tactical operations center at Bagram Airfield, monitoring signals intelligence intercepts of Taliban financiers. They didn't know that I missed Mark's 30th birthday because I was locked inside a SIF, a sensitive compartmented information facility, at Camp Lemonnier in Djibouti, tracking the Hawala money networks funding al-Shabaab across the Horn of Africa. I gave up the luxury of a normal life to protect the very people who pitied me for not having one. And then there was Chloe. Chloe had married Mark 3 years ago, bringing with her an overwhelming cloud of entitlement and an inexplicable, sudden influx of extreme wealth. 18 months ago, she opened Lumiere, a luxury lifestyle boutique in the most expensive commercial district of Scarsdale. She sold imported European goods, 800 silk scarves, $2,500 Italian leather handbags, and custom jewelry. Almost overnight, my brother's life transformed. The modest starter home became a 6-bedroom colonial. The sensible commuter car was traded in for a $140,000 Mercedes-Benz G-Wagon. My parents were completely intoxicated by it. In their eyes, Chloe was the golden child they had always wanted, the successful entrepreneur who had elevated the family name. They worshipped her sudden affluence, laughing at her jokes, praising her business acumen, and constantly comparing her hustle to my stagnant government job. I watched the dynamic shift with professional detachment. At family dinners, Chloe would routinely offer to pay for my meals with a loud theatrical sigh, ensuring everyone at the table knew she was subsidizing the poor civil servant. She would comment on my scuffed tactical boots, offering to buy me something a little more feminine from her shop. Mark, who used to be my closest confidant, simply looked down at his plate, fully subjugated by his wife's aggressive financial dominance. A lesser officer might have broken operational security. A lesser woman might have slammed her badge on the mahogany dining table and explained the exact Title 18 and Title 50 federal authorities she commanded. But ego is a liability. I endured their pity and their thinly veiled insults because my clearance dictated my silence. I was sworn to protect classified intelligence, not my own pride. If letting my family believe I was a failure was the price of maintaining my cover, it was a price I paid gladly and in full. Discipline is the ability to suffer in silence while you wait for the objective to clear. But the objective was shifting. 3 months prior to the barbecue, a flag had triggered in a massive counter-threat finance operation we were running out of the JTTF. We were tracking a sanctioned overseas syndicate laundering millions of dollars through domestic front companies. The flag traced back to a small, impossibly lucrative luxury boutique in Scarsdale, New York. Suddenly, my personal life and my operational life were locked in the same crosshairs. I had watched my sister-in-law parade around in designer clothes, lecturing me on the value of hard work, knowing with absolute, classified certainty that her success was built on a foundation of federal felonies. I never minded being the disappointment of the family, because the truth of my life was classified, until Chloe's greed forced my two worlds to collide. To understand how the trap snapped shut, we have to rewind 45 minutes before the sirens started howling through Westchester, New York. At 1400 hours, the barbecue had been proceeding according to the standard operational baseline of any upper-middle-class family gathering. The air smelled of expensive marinades and cut grass. I was sitting quietly near the perimeter of the patio, sipping a lukewarm glass of water, observing the dynamics of the crowd. That was when Chloe decided it was time to execute her ambush. She marched across the deck, her heels clicking aggressively against the wood, and bypassed all standard social pleasantries. She didn't ask to speak to me privately. She didn't lower her voice. She positioned herself squarely between me and the exit, crossing her arms over her chest. "I know you were at the boutique on Tuesday, Sarah," she said, her voice carrying sharply over the soft jazz playing from the outdoor speakers. "My manager saw your pathetic gray Ford in the alley behind Lumiere." I looked at her, maintaining eye contact but offering zero verbal confirmation. "I am missing $4,500 in cash from the back office safe," she continued, her volume increasing, ensuring every aunt, uncle, and cousin in the vicinity stopped mid-sentence. "I know you're struggling on your little government salary. I know you resent my success. But stealing from your own family? That is a new low even for you." The accusation hung in the humid air, thick and absurd. She was right about one thing. I had been at the boutique on Tuesday. What Chloe didn't know was that I had been there at 0300 hours under the authority of a Rule 41 covert federal search warrant signed by a United States magistrate judge in the Southern District of New York. I wasn't there for petty cash. I was there with an FBI computer analysis response team, CART expert. While Chloe was sleeping in her six-bedroom colonial, my team bypassed her commercial security system, accessed her back office, and physically cloned the master hard drives of her point-of-sale servers. I didn't care about the $4,500 of physical currency she claimed was missing. I was there for the $4.2 million in illicit wire transfers she had routed through shell companies in Nicosia, Cyprus, funneling funds directly to a sanctioned overseas syndicate. An amateur steals from a safe. A professional seizes the entire infrastructure, but I couldn't say that. I sat there in my plastic lawn chair, absorbing the aggressive posturing of a woman who was unknowingly weeks away from a federal indictment. The rest of the family converged on the patio, drawn by the scent of conflict. I looked at my brother, Mark. I expected him to intervene, to de-escalate, to at least ask for proof before allowing his wife to publicly execute my character. Instead, Mark looked down at his loafers. He suddenly became very interested in the grain of the wooden deck. He shifted his weight, put his hands in his pockets, and said absolutely nothing. Betrayal in a family rarely arrives with a shout. It usually creeps in through the silence of the people who should defend you. "Did you take it, Sarah?" my mother asked. Her voice was thin, trembling with embarrassment. She stepped forward, her hands wringing together. "Because if you did, if you're behind on your rent or your bills, we can help you. Just give Chloe her money back so we don't have to make a scene." That was the sting. That was the moment the operational detachment threatened to slip. There is a unique cold clarity that washes over you when you realize your blood relatives consider you capable of petty theft simply because you don't wear a Rolex. They didn't ask if Chloe was mistaken. They didn't ask for my side of the story. They looked at my scuffed boots, my cheap watch, and my quiet demeanor, and they instantly calculated that I was guilty. I looked at my mother. "I didn't take her money." "Don't lie to us!" Chloe shrieked, instantly dialing the dramatics to maximum capacity. She pulled her iPhone from her pocket, jabbing at the screen with her thumb. "You're a liar and a thief. I am calling the police. I am having you arrested right here, right now. We'll see how smug you are when you're sitting in the back of a squad car." She brought the phone to her ear. I watched the adrenaline spike in her system. She was operating purely on emotion, thrilled by the audience, intoxicated by the perceived power she held over me. She spoke to the 911 dispatcher with practiced hysteria, claiming a disgruntled relative had robbed her business and was currently trespassing on her property. A tactical advantage is gained not by stopping your adversary from making a mistake, but by quietly removing the safety net before they jump. I sat back in my chair and listened to her give the dispatcher my physical description, knowing the officers she was summoning answered directly to the man I had briefed 72 hours ago. If you've ever had to sit silently while someone arrogant underestimated you, hit the like button and subscribe. It tells YouTube to share this story. Now, let's get back to the barbecue. There is a specific kind of gravity that settles over a room, or in this case, a suburban patio, after the police are called. The air gets heavier, time dilates. For the average person, those endless minutes waiting for the flashing lights to arrive feel like suffocating underwater. For me, it felt like an operational holding pattern. 7 years ago, in the freezing, windowless interrogation simulation rooms at Fort Huachuca, Arizona, a senior instructor taught me the most valuable lesson of my intelligence career. He walked around my metal chair, his boots echoing sharply off the concrete, and told me that silence is a weapon of mass psychological destruction. The untrained mind abhors a vacuum. If you refuse to speak, an adversary will inevitably panic and rush to fill the dead air with their own mistakes. Panic is a civilian luxury. I was trained to sit perfectly still and wait for the target to secure their own traps. I sat in my plastic lawn chair, my hands loose and visible in my lap, and I watched Chloe begin to unravel in the silence. She had expected me to scream back. She had expected a tearful denial, a begging plea for forgiveness, or even a panicked sprint for the driveway. My total absence of reaction was short-circuiting her script. She needed a reaction to validate her performance. When words failed to pull one out of me, she resorted to kinetic action. She closed the distance between us, standing so close I could smell the stale Prosecco on her breath, and shoved her hand hard into my left shoulder. "Look at me when I am talking to you," she hissed, her voice vibrating with genuine instability. My body's autonomic nervous system instantly flared. 10 years of combatives training screamed at me to trap her wrist, shift my center of gravity, and put her flat on the slate patio before she could draw her next breath. My right hand twitched, a micro-movement barely perceptible to the human eye, but I didn't move. I let my shoulder rock back with the impact of her shove, and then I simply realigned my posture. Discipline is not the absence of an instinct. It is the absolute ironclad mastery over it. I looked up at her, my expression utterly blank. The failure of her physical provocation broke something in her. She spun around to face the rest of the family, throwing her hands in the air, playing the victim for her captive audience. That was when the second opportunity to end the charade presented itself. My mother, unable to bear the social tension a second longer, stepped forward. She was clutching her small leather designer purse like a life preserver. "Chloe, please," my mother pleaded, her voice cracking. "Let's cancel the police. I have my checkbook right here. I will write you a check for $5,000 right now. Just let's keep this in the family. We don't need Sarah going to jail over a stupid mistake." I looked at my mother. I saw the desperate, tragic willingness to pay a ransom for a crime I hadn't committed, just to preserve the illusion of a perfect Sunday afternoon. She was willing to buy my guilt to save her own embarrassment. I could have stopped it right there. I could have stood up, pulled my federal badge from its Kydex holster at my hip, and ended the entire theater production. But if you spring a trap too early, you only catch a limb. I needed to catch the whole predator, so I kept my mouth shut. I turned my attention away from my mother's checkbook and focused my vision on the patio table. A single aggressive yellow jacket wasp was buzzing furiously over a large crystal bowl of potato salad. It landed on the edge of the spoon, as its wings vibrating violently as it sampled the mayonnaise. I tracked its movements with clinical precision: up, down, hover, land. It was a grounding technique. By focusing on a micro-deterrent in the environment, I kept my heart rate anchored in the low 50s while the world around me spun out of control. Through the buzzing of the wasp, I heard it. The heavy, unmistakable crunch of thick rubber tires rolling onto the loose gravel of my brother's front driveway. The engine of the police cruiser idled high for a second before being thrown into park. A heavy car door slammed shut, echoing loudly across the side yard. Heavy footsteps began to walk up the wooden steps leading to the backyard gate. The moment of theoretical consequences had just become physical reality. My aunt gasped. My mother buried her face in her hands. Mark finally looked up from the wooden decking, his face pale and slick with nervous sweat. Chloe, however, lit up like a flare. This was her grand finale. This was the moment she had engineered to permanently eradicate the underachieving sister from her perfect, wealthy life. Chloe rushed toward the officers, tears of fake victimhood streaming down her face, completely unaware that the man stepping out of the cruiser wasn't a local patrolman. It was Chief Davis himself. The heavy wooden gate at the side of the house didn't just open. It was swung wide with the deliberate, heavy-handed authority of law enforcement entering an unsecured sector. Chief Thomas Davis of the Scarsdale Police Department stepped onto the slate patio. He was a 20-year veteran of the force, a man built like a cinder block, wearing his crisp Class A uniform with the gold stars gleaming sharply on his collar. Behind him, 2 tactical officers in heavy outer plate carriers flanked the entrance, their hands resting neutrally but securely on their duty belts. Chloe didn't hesitate. She launched herself forward, completely misreading the tactical posture of the men entering her backyard. She ran toward Chief Davis, her face instantly contorting into a mask of exaggerated, tearful victimhood. She pointed a trembling, manicured finger back at me, still sitting silently in my cheap plastic chair. "Officer, thank God you're here. That's her." She stole $4,500 from my boutique safe. "She is a thief! Arrest her right now!" True power does not need to yell. It simply waits for the room to stop talking. Chief Davis did not reach for his handcuffs. He did not acknowledge the hysterical woman in the silk blouse currently blocking his path. His eyes tracked over the spilled lemonade, scanned the terrified faces of my parents, and finally locked onto my position in the corner of the yard. He stepped smoothly around Chloe, ignoring her frantic gesturing as if she were nothing more than a piece of wind-blown lawn furniture. He stopped 3 feet in front of me, squared his broad shoulders, and brought his right hand up in a crisp, razor-sharp salute. "Good afternoon, Supervisory Special Agent Jenkins." His deep baritone voice rolled over the patio like a physical shockwave. "We weren't expecting you to execute the warrant until Monday." The silence that followed was absolute, terrifying, and total. It was the sound of a carefully constructed reality collapsing in on itself. The cicadas seemed to stop chirping. The soft jazz playing from the outdoor speakers suddenly felt like a blaring siren. Every single member of my family stopped breathing at the exact same moment. Chloe froze. Her arm remained suspended in the air, pointing at nothing. Her brain simply lacked the processing power to reconcile the local chief of police saluting the family disappointment. "What?" Chloe stammered, her voice dropping all of its previous theatrical volume, reduced to a hollow, breathless squeak. "No, she's my sister-in-law. She works a desk job." "Why are you calling her an agent?" Chief Davis finally turned his attention to her. The professional respect he had just shown me evaporated, instantly replaced by institutional coldness. "Ma'am, I need you to step back," he instructed, his tone leaving absolutely zero room for negotiation. "You are currently interfering with the lead federal investigator of a joint terrorism task force operation." Chloe's face drained of all color, rapidly matching the white vinyl siding of the colonial house she was so fiercely proud of. The expensive, oversized designer sunglasses she had perched on top of her head slipped loose. They tumbled down, hitting the slate patio tiles with a sharp, sickening crack. No one moved to pick them up. Captain Jenkins has been running an 18-month counter-threat finance operation out of the New York field office. Chief Davis explained to the patio at large, though his eyes never left Chloe. "My officers are here today to assist the Bureau in securing the perimeter of your boutique Lumiere while federal agents execute a seizure of assets." My mother let out a small, strangled gasp. The checkbook she had been so desperate to use to buy my innocence slipped from her fingers, fluttering to the ground next to a dropped pair of silver grilling tongs. "Chloe Jenkins," Chief Davis continued, his voice devoid of any emotion, "you are being placed under federal arrest for violation of Title 18, United States Code, Section 1343, wire fraud and international money laundering." I finally stood up. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I didn't demand an apology from the people who had spent the last hour mentally fitting me for an orange jumpsuit. I simply smoothed out a crease in my standard issue gray polo and stepped forward into my operational capacity. The physical shift in gravity was palpable. I was no longer the quiet sister sitting in the corner. I was the architect of the federal case that was currently dismantling their entire world. One of the tactical officers stepped forward, produced a set of heavy steel handcuffs, and secured Chloe's wrists behind her back. Chief Davis pulled a laminated card from his breast pocket and began reading her the Miranda warning, his voice steady and rhythmic, right next to the crystal bowl of potato salad. My mother was crying now, genuine tears of absolute shock. My aunt was staring at me as if I were a stranger who had just materialized in her family's backyard. I turned my head and looked at the man standing frozen by the Weber grill. My brother finally looked me in the eye, searching for the sister he thought he knew, but all he found was an officer of the United States government doing her job. I didn't stay for the aftermath. Once the tactical officers escorted Chloe to the rear of the police cruiser, her expensive heels dragging clumsily through the loose gravel, my presence was no longer operationally required. I had secured the target, the local police had secured the perimeter, the bureau would handle the paperwork. My mother was weeping onto Mark's shoulder, her face buried in the fabric of his polo shirt. Mark was staring at the empty space on the patio where his wife had just been standing, his expression hollowed out by the sudden, violent collapse of his reality. I didn't offer them a goodbye. I didn't offer an explanation, and I certainly didn't wait for an apology. I simply nodded to Chief Davis, walked out the heavy wooden gate, and got into my unmarked 6-year-old Ford Taurus. By the time I merged onto the Taconic State Parkway, the flashing red and blue lights were miles behind me. 0500 hours, Sunday morning. My apartment in Queens was small. It didn't have imported slate patio tiles, a manicured lawn, or 6 bedrooms. It had exposed brick, a single window looking out over a rusted fire escape, and the low, constant hum of the city below. To my family, this apartment was a symbol of my stagnation. To me, it was a sanctuary of absolute control. I stood in the narrow kitchen, watching the black coffee drip into a chipped green army mug. The ceramic handle was missing a large piece, broken during a rapid tactical pack-out at Camp Lemonnier 4 years ago. I preferred it over the fine china my mother kept locked behind glass cabinets in Westchester. China shatters when dropped. This mug had survived a war zone. My golden retriever, Max, sat dutifully at my feet. I reached down and scratched him behind the ears. He leaned his heavy weight against my shin, a silent, steady companion who never required a verbal explanation to know where he stood with me. Dogs understand loyalty in a way humans often struggle to conceptualize. My personal cell phone had been vibrating aggressively on the kitchen counter since 0600. 6 missed calls from my mother. 12 texts from Mark. Long, frantic paragraphs filled with apologies, excuses, and sudden panic declarations of love and respect. They were desperate to rewrite the narrative of the previous afternoon. They wanted to explain that they hadn't really believed Chloe, that the stress of the accusation had just confused them, that we were family and family always forgives. I deleted the thread without replying. You cannot apologize for showing someone your true baseline. When the pressure spiked, they didn't just abandon me. They actively facilitated my execution to protect their own social comfort. In the intelligence community, a compromised asset is a burned asset. You don't try to repair the connection. You cut the line, you sanitize the operational space, and you move forward. Forgiveness is a noble civilian concept. I prefer the safety of permanent operational distance. I carried my coffee to the small wooden desk in the corner of my living room and opened my government-issued laptop. The screen illuminated the dim room with a stark, clinical blue light. I inserted my security token and logged into the Bureau's encrypted server. There was one new message in my inbox from the Assistant Direct Charge of the New York Field Office. Subject, Operation Luminous, status, secured. The body of the email was brief, written with the sterile precision of federal law enforcement. Chloe Jenkins was currently being processed at the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn. She had been denied bail by a federal magistrate, deemed a severe flight risk due to her financial connections with the sanctioned overseas syndicate. The $4.2 million in illicit funds had been successfully frozen. Lumiere was padlocked. The grand jury had already convened to formalize the indictment for Title 18 wire fraud. Her entire empire of lies had been systematically dismantled in under 24 hours. She needed a captive audience to feel powerful. I only needed the truth. I closed the laptop, the screen going black, and took a slow sip of my coffee. The silence of the apartment was profound. It wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of a family waiting for an arrest. It was the clean, clear silence of a completed mission. I walked over to the iron hook by the front door, where I had hung the light jacket I had worn the day before. As I reached into the pocket to retrieve my car keys, the fabric brushed briefly against my face. I paused. The only thing left of my sister-in-law's grand performance was the faint, fading smell of charcoal burning out on my jacket. The content on this channel consists of fictional stories created for storytelling and entertainment. These narratives are not intended to represent real individuals, organizations, or events. All visual elements are for illustrative purposes only. If this story stayed with you, if you've ever been dismissed by the people who should have believed in you most, leave a comment. Tell me where you're watching from. There are more stories ahead. Subscribe and stay with us.